Chapter 11 of Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship by Victor Appleton. Chapter 11. A Day Off. Tom Swift pondered long and intently over what his father had said to him. He sat for several minutes in his private office, after the aged inventor had passed out, reviewing in his mind the talk just finished. "I wonder," said Tom slowly, "if any of the new men could have obtained work here for the purpose of furthering that plot the lieutenant suspects. I wonder if that could be true." And the more Tom thought of it, the more he was convinced that such a thing was at least possible. "I must make a close inspection, and weed out any suspicious characters," he decided, "though I need every man I have working now to get the Mars finished in time. Yes, I must look into this." Tom had reached a point in his work where he could leave much to his helpers. He had several good foremen, and, with his father to take general supervision over more important details, the young inventor had more time to himself. Of course he did not lay too many burdens on his father's shoulders, since Mr. Swift's health was not of the best. But Tom's latest idea, the aerial warship, was so well on toward completion that his presence was not needed in that shop more than 2 or 3 times a day. "When I'm not there, I'll go about in the other shops, and sort of size up the situation," he decided. "I may be able to get a line on some of those plotters, if there are any here." Lieutenant Marbury had departed for a time, to look after some personal matters, but he was to return inside of a week, when it was hoped to give the aerial warship its first real test in flight, and under some of the conditions that it would meet with in actual warfare. As Tom was about to leave his office, to put into effect his new resolution to make a casual inspection of the other shops, he met Koku, the giant, coming in. Koku's hand and face were black with oil and machine filings. "Well, what have you been doing?" Tom wanted to know. "Did you have an accident?" For Koku had no knowledge of machinery, and could not even be trusted to tighten up a simple nut by himself. But if someone stood near him, and directed him how to apply his enormous strength, Koku could do more than several machines. "No accident, master," he replied. "I help man lift that hammer thing that pounds so. It gets stuck." "What, the hammer of the drop forger?" cried Tom. "Was that out of order again?" "Him stuck," explained Koku simply. There was an automatic trip hammer in one of the shops, used for pounding out drop forgings, and this hammer seemed to take especial delight in getting out of order. Very often it jammed, or stuck, as Koku described it, and if the hammer could not be forced back on the channel or upright guide plates, it meant that it must be taken apart, and valuable time lost. Once Koku had been near when the hammer got out of order, and while the workmen were preparing to dismantle it, the giant seized the big block of steel, and with a heave of his mighty shoulders forced it back on the guides. "And is that what you did this time?" asked Tom. "Yes, master. Me fix hammer," Koku answered. "I get dirty. I no care. Man say I no can fix. I show him I can." "What man said that?" Man who run hammer. Ha! I lift him by one finger. He say he no like to work on hammer. He want to work on airship. I tell him, I tell you, maybe you give him job. He baby. Cuckoo can work hammer. Me fix it when it get stuck. Well, maybe you know what you're talking about, but I don't, said Tom, with a pleasant smile at his big helper. Come on, Cuckoo. We'll go see what it all means. Cuckoo work hammer, maybe? Asked the giant hopefully. Well, I'll see, half promised Tom. If it's going to get out of gear all the while, it might pay me to keep you at it so you could get it back in place whenever it kicked up a fuss, and so save time. I'll see about it. Cuckoo led the way to the shop, where the trip hammer was installed. It was working perfectly now, as Tom could tell by the thundering blows it struck. The man operating it looked up as Tom approached, and a gesture from the young inventor shut off the power. "Been having trouble here?" asked Tom, noting that the workman was one of the new hands he had hired. "Yes, sir, a little," was the respectful answer. "This hammer goes on a strike every now and then, and gets jammed. Your giant there forced it back into place, which is more than I could do with a big bar for a lever. He sure has some muscle." "Yes," agreed Tom, "he's pretty strong. But what's this you said about wanting to give up this job, and go on the airship construction?" The man turned red under his coat of grime. "I didn't intend him to repeat that to you, Mr. Swift," he said. "I was a little put out at the way this hammer worked. I lose so much time at it that I said I'd like to be transferred to the airship department. I've worked in one before, but I'm not making a kick," he added quickly. "Work is too scarce for that." "I understand," said Tom. "I have been thinking of making a change. Cuckoo seems to like this hammer, and knows how to get it in order once it gets off the guides. You say you have had experience in airship construction?" "Yes, sir. I've worked on the engines, and on the planes." "Know anything about dirigible balloons?" "Yes, I've worked on them too, but the engineering part is my specialty. I'm a little out of my element on a trip hammer." "I see. Well, perhaps I'll give you a trial. Meanwhile you might break Cuckoo in on operating this machine. If I transfer you, I'll put him on this hammer." "Thank you, Mr. Swift. I'll show him all I know about it. Oh, there goes the hammer again!" he exclaimed, for, as he started it up, as Tom turned away, the big piece of steel once more jammed on the channel plates. "Me fix!" exclaimed the giant eagerly, anxious for a chance to exhibit his great strength. "Wait a minute!" exclaimed Tom. "I want to get a look at that machine." He inspected it carefully before he signaled for Cuckoo to force the hammer back into place, but if Tom saw anything suspicious he said nothing. There was, however, a queer look on his face as he turned aside, and he murmured to himself as he walked away: "So you want to be transferred to the airship department, do you? Well, we'll see about that. We'll see." Tom had more problems to solve than those of making an aerial warship that would be acceptable to the United States government. Ned Newton called on his chum that evening. The two talked of many things, gradually veering around to the subject uppermost in Tom's mind, his new aircraft. "You're thinking too much of that," Ned warned him. "You're as bad as the time you went for your first flight." "I suppose I am," admitted Tom, "but the success of the Mars means a whole lot to me. And that's something I nearly forgot. I've got to go out to the shop now. Want to come along, Ned?" Sure, though I tell you that you're working too hard, burning the electric light at both ends." "This is just something simple," Tom said. "It won't take long." He went out, followed by his chum. "But this isn't the way to the airship shed," objected the young bank clerk, as he noted in which direction Tom was leading him. "I know it isn't," Tom replied, "but I want to look at one of the trip hammers in the forge shop when none of the men is around. I've been having a little trouble there." "Trouble!" exclaimed his chum. "Has the plot Lieutenant Marbury spoke of developed?" "Not exactly. This is something else," and Tom told of the trouble with the big hammer. "I had an idea," the young inventor said, "that the man at the machine let it get out of order purposely, so I'd change him. I want to see if my suspicions are correct." Tom carefully inspected the hammer by the light of a powerful portable electric lamp Ned held. "Ah, there it is!" Tom suddenly exclaimed. "Something wrong?" Ned inquired. "Yes, this is what's been throwing the hammer off the guides all the while," and Tom pulled out a small steel bolt that had been slipped into an oil hole. "A certain amount of vibration," he explained to Ned, "would rattle the bolt out so that it would force the hammer to one side, throwing it off the channel plates, and rendering it useless for the time being." "A foxy trick," commented Tom. "No wonder the machine got out of kilter so easily. Do you think it was done purposely?" "Well, I'm not going to say, but I'm going to watch that man. He wants to be transferred to the airship department. He put this in the hammer, perhaps, to have an excuse for a change. Well, I'll give it to him." "You don't mean that you'd take a fellow like that and put him to work on your new aerial warship, do you, Tom?" "Yes, I think I will, Ned. You see, I look at it this way. I haven't any real proof against him now. He could only laugh at me if I accused him. But you've heard the proverb about giving a calf rope enough and he'll hang himself, haven't you?" "I think I have." "Well, I'm going to give this fellow a little rope. I'll transfer him as he asks, and I'll keep a close watch on him." "But won't it be risky?" "Perhaps, but no more so than leaving him in here to work mischief. If he is hatching a plot, the sooner it's over with the better I shall like it. I don't like a shot to hang fire. I'm warned now, and I'll be ready for him. I have a line on him to suspect. This is the first clue," and Tom held up the incriminating bolt. "I think you're taking too big a risk, Tom," his chum said. "Why not discharge the man?" "Because that might only smooth things over for a time. If this plot is being laid, the sooner it comes to a head, and breaks, the better. Have it done, short, sharp, and quick, is my motto. Yes, I'll shift him in the morning. Oh, but I wish it was all over, and the Mars was accepted by Uncle Sam." And Tom put his hand to his head with a tired gesture. "Say, old man," exclaimed Ned, "what you want is a day off, and I'm going to see that you get it. You need a little vacation." "Perhaps I do," assented Tom wearily. "Then you'll have it," cried Ned. "There's going to be a little picnic tomorrow. Why can't you go with Mary Nestor? She'd like you to take her, I'm sure. Her cousin, Helen Randall, is on from New York, and she wants to go also." "How do you know?" asked Tom quickly. "Because she said so," laughed Ned. "I was over to the house to call. I have met Helen before, and I suggested that you and I would take the two girls and have a day off. You'll come, won't you?" "Well, I don't know," spoke Tom slowly. "I ought to " "Nonsense! Give up work for one day," urged Ned. "Come along. It'll do you good. Get the cobwebs out of your head." "All right, I'll go," assented Tom, after a moment's thought. The next day, having instructed his father and the foreman to look well to the various shops, and having seen that the work on the new aerial warship was progressing favourably, Tom left for a day's outing with his chum and the two girls. The picnic was held in a grove that surrounded a small lake, and after luncheon the four friends went for a ride in a launch Tom hired. They went to the upper end of the lake, in rather a pretty but lonesome locality. "Tom, you look tired," said Mary. "I'm sure you've been working too hard." "Why, I'm not working any harder than usual," Tom insisted. "Yes, he is too," declared Ned. "And he's running more chances too." "Chances?" repeated Mary. "Oh, that's all bosh," laughed Tom. "Come on, let's go ashore and walk." "That suits me," spoke Ned. Helen and Mary assented, and soon the four young persons were strolling through the shady wood. After a bit the couples became separated, and Tom found himself walking beside Mary in a woodland path. The girl glanced at her companion's face, and ventured: "A penny for your thoughts, Tom?" "They're worth more than that," he replied gallantly. "I was thinking of you." "Oh, how nicely you say it!" she laughed. "But I know better. You're puzzling over some problem. Tell me, what did Ned mean when he hinted at danger? Is there any, Tom?" "None at all," he assured her. "It's just a sort of notion." Mary made a sudden gesture of silence. "Hark!" she whispered to Tom. "I heard someone mention your name then. Listen." End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship by Victor Appleton. Chapter 12. A Night Alarm. Mary Nestor spoke with such earnestness, and her action in catching hold of Tom's arm to enjoin silence was so pronounced that, though he had at first regarded the matter in the light of a joke, he soon thought otherwise. He glanced from the girl's face to the dense underbrush on either side of the woodland path. "What is it, Mary?" he asked in a whisper. "I don't just know. I heard whispering, and thought it was the rustling of the leaves of the trees. Then someone spoke your name quite loudly. Didn't you hear it?" Tom shook his head in negation. "It may be Ned and his friend," he whispered, his lips close to Mary's ear. "I think not," was her answer. "Listen, there it is again." Distinctly then, Tom heard, from some opening in the screen of bushes, his own name spoken. "Did you hear it?" asked Mary, barely forming the words with her lips, but Tom could read their motion. "Yes," he nodded. Then motioning to Mary to remain where she was, he stepped forward, taking care to tread only on grassy places where there were no little twigs or branches to break and betray his presence. He was working his way toward the sound of the unseen voice. There was a sudden movement in the bushes, just beyond the spot Tom was making for. He halted quickly and peered ahead. Mary, too, was looking on anxiously. Tom saw the forms of two men, partially concealed by bushes, walking away from him. The men took no pains to conceal their movements, so Tom was emboldened to advance with less caution. He hurried to where he could get a good view, and, at the sight of one of the men, he uttered an exclamation. "What is it?" asked Mary, who was now at his side. She had seen that Tom had thrown aside caution, and she had come up to join him. "That man! I know him!" the young inventor exclaimed. "It is Feldman, the one who wanted to be changed from the trip hammer to the airship department. But who is that with him?" As Tom spoke, the other turned, and at the sight of his face, Mary Nestor said: "He looks like a Frenchman, with that little moustache and imperial." "So he is!" exclaimed Tom in a hoarse whisper. "He must be the Frenchman that Eradicate spoke about. I wonder what this can mean. I didn't know Feldman had left the shop." "You may know what you're talking about, but I don't, Tom," said Mary, with a smile at her companion. "Are they friends of yours?" "Hardly," spoke the young inventor dryly. "That one, Feldman, is one of my workmen. He had charge of a drop forge press and trip hammer that—" "Spare me the details, Tom," interrupted Mary. "You know I don't understand a thing about machinery. The wireless you erected on Earthquake Island was as much as I could comprehend." "Well, a trip hammer isn't as complicated as that," spoke Tom, with a laugh, as he noticed that the two men were far enough away so they could not hear him. "What I was going to say was, that one of those men works in our shops. The other I don't know, but I agree with you that he does look like a Frenchman, and old Eradicate had a meeting with a man whom he described as being of that nationality." "And you say they are not friends of yours?" "I have no reason to believe they are." "Then they must be enemies!" exclaimed Mary, with quick intuition. "Oh, Tom, you will be careful, won't you?" "Of course I will, little girl," he said, a note of fondness creeping into his voice, as he covered the small hand with his own large one. "But there is no danger." "Then why were these men discussing you?" "I don't know that they were, Mary." "They mentioned your name." "Well, that may be. Probably one of them, Feldman, who works for me, was speaking to his companion about the chance for a position. My father and I employ a number of men, you know." "Well, I suppose it is all right, Tom, and I surely hope it is. But you will be careful, won't you? And you look more worried than you used to. Has anything gone wrong?" "Not a thing, little girl. Everything is going fine. My new aerial warship will soon make a trial flight, and I'd be pleased to have you as a passenger." "Would you really, Tom?" "Of course. Consider that you have the first invitation." "That's awfully nice of you. But you do look worried, Tom. Has anything troubled you?" "No, not much. Everything is going all right now. We did have a little trouble at a fire in one of the buildings." "A fire! Oh, Tom, you never told me." "Well, it didn't amount to much. The only suspicious fact about it was that it seemed to have been of incendiary origin." Mary seemed much alarmed, and again begged Tom to be on his guard, which he promised to do. Had Mary known the warnings uttered by Lieutenant Marbury, she might have had more occasion for worry. "Do you suppose that hammer man of yours came to these woods to meet that Frenchman and talk about you, Tom?" asked his companion, when the two men had strolled out of sight, and the young people were on their way back to the launch. "Well, it's possible. I have been warned that foreign spies are trying to get hold of some of my patents, and also to hamper the government in the use of some others I have sold. But they'll have their own troubles to get away with anything. The works are pretty well guarded, and you forget I have the giant, Cuckoo, who is almost a personal bodyguard." "Yes, but he can't be everywhere at once. Oh, you will be careful, won't you, Tom?" "Yes, Mary, I will," promised the young inventor. "But don't say anything to Ned about what we just saw and heard." "Why not?" "Because he's been at me to hire a couple of detectives to watch over me, and this would give him another excuse. Just don't say anything, and I'll adopt all precautions I think are needful." "I will on condition that you do that." "And I promise I will." With that Mary had to be content. A little later they joined Ned and his friend, and soon they were moving swiftly down the lake in the launch. "Well, hasn't it done you good to take a day off?" Ned demanded of his chum, when they were on their homeward way. "Yes, I think it has," agreed Tom. "You swung your thoughts into a new channel, didn't you?" "Oh, yes, I found something new to think about," admitted the young inventor, with a quick look at Mary. But though Tom thus passed off lightly the little incident of the day, he gave it serious thought when he was alone. "Those fellows were certainly talking about me," he reasoned. "I wonder what for? And Feldman left the shop without my knowledge. I'll have to look into that. I wonder if that Frenchy looking chap I saw was the one who tried to pump Eradicate. Another point to settle." The last was easily disposed of, for on reaching his shops that afternoon, Tom cross-questioned the colored man, and obtained a most accurate description of the odd foreigner. It tallied in every detail with the man Tom had seen in the woods. "And now about Feldman," mused Tom, as he went to the foreman of the shop where the suspected man had been employed. "Yes, Feldman asked for a day off," the foreman said in response to Tom's question. "He claimed his mother was sick, and he wanted to go to see her. I knew you wouldn't object, as we were not rushed in his department." "Oh, that's all right," said Tom quickly. "Did he say where his mother lived?" "Over Lafayette way." "Humph!" murmured Tom. To himself he added, "Queer that he should be near Lake Lorraine, in an opposite direction from Lafayette. This will bear an investigation." The next day Tom made it his business to pass near the hammer that was so frequently out of order. He found Feldman busy instructing Koku in its operation. Tom resolved on a little strategy. "How is it working, Feldman?" he asked. "Very well, Mr. Swift. There doesn't seem to be any trouble at all, but it may happen any minute. Koku seems to take to it like a duck to water." "Well, when he is ready to assume charge let me know." "And then am I to go into the aeroplane shop?" "I'll see. By the way, how is your mother?" he asked quickly, looking Feldman full in the face. "She is much better. I took a day off yesterday to go to see her," the man replied quietly enough, and without sign of embarrassment. "That's good. Let me see. She lives over near Lake Lorraine, doesn't she?" This time Feldman could not repress a start, but he covered it admirably by stooping over to pick up a tool that fell to the floor. "No, my mother is in Lafayette," he said. "I don't know where Lake Lorraine is." "Oh," said Tom, as he turned aside to hide a smile. He was sure now he knew at least one of the plotters. But Tom was not yet ready to show his hand. He wanted better evidence than any he yet possessed. It would take a little more time. Work on the aerial warship was rushed, and it seemed likely that a trial flight could be made before the date set. Lieutenant Marbury sent word that he would be on hand when needed, and in some of the shops, where fittings for the Mars were being made, night and day shifts were working. "Well, if everything goes well, we'll take her for a trial flight to morrow," said Tom, coming in from the shops one evening. "Guns and all?" asked Ned, who had come over to pay his chum a visit. Mr. Damon was also on hand, invoking occasional blessings. "Guns and all," replied Tom. Ned had a little vacation from the bank, and was to stay all night, as was Mr. Damon. What time it was, save that it must be near midnight, Tom could not tell, but he was suddenly awakened by hearing yells from Eradicate. "Massa Tom! Massa Tom!" yelled the excited colored man. "Git up! Git up! Suffin terrible am happening in de balloon shop! Hurry! And you stand still, Boomerang, or I'll twist your tail, dat's what I will! Hurry, Massa Tom!" Tom leaped out of bed. Chapter 12.
Of Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship by Victor Appleton. Chapter 13. The Capture. Tom Swift was something like a fireman. He had lived so long in an atmosphere of constant alarms and danger that he was always ready for almost any emergency. His room was equipped with the end in view that he could act promptly and effectively. So, when he heard Eradicate's alarm, though he wondered what the old colored man was doing out of bed at that hour, Tom did not stop to reason out that puzzle. He acted quickly. His first care was to throw on the main switch, connected with a big storage battery, and to which were attached the wires of the lighting system. This at once illuminated every shop in the plant, and also the grounds themselves. Tom wanted to see what was going on. The use of a storage battery eliminated the running of the dynamo all night. And once he had done this, Tom began pulling on some clothes and a pair of shoes. At the same time he reached out with one hand and pressed a button that sounded an alarm in the sleeping quarters of Koku, the giant, and in the rooms of some of the older and most trusted men. All this while Eradicate was shouting away down in the yard. "Massa Tom! Massa Tom!" he called. "Hurry! Hurry! Dey is killin' Koku!" "Killing Koku!" exclaimed Tom, as he finished his hasty dressing. "Then my giant must already be in the fracas. I wonder what it's all about, anyhow." "What's up, Tom?" came Ned's voice from the adjoining room. "I thought I heard a noise." "Your thoughts do you credit, Ned," Tom answered. "If you listen right close you'll hear several noises." "By Jove, you're right, old man!" Tom could hear his chum bound out of bed to the floor, and at the same time, from the big shed where Tom was building his aerial warship, came a series of yells and shouts. "That's Koku's voice!" Tom exclaimed, as he recognized the tones of the giant. "I'm coming, Tom," Ned informed his chum. "Wait a minute." "No time to wait," Tom replied, buttoning his coat as he sped down the hall. "Oh, Tom, what is it?" asked Mrs. Baggert, the housekeeper, looking from her room. "I don't know, but don't let Dad get excited, no matter what happens. Just put him off until I come back. I think it isn't anything serious." Mr. Damon, who roomed next to Ned, came out of his own apartment partially dressed. "Bless my suspenders!" he cried to Tom, those articles just then dangling over his hips. "What is it? What has happened? Bless my steam gauge! Don't tell me it's a fire!" "I think it isn't that," Tom answered. "No alarm has rung. Koku seems to be in trouble." "Well, he's big enough to look after himself, that's one consolation," chuckled Mr. Damon. "I'll be right with you." By this time Ned had run out into the hall, and together he and Tom sped down the corridor. They could not hear the shouts of Eradicate so plainly now, as he was on the other side of the house. But when the two young men reached the front porch they could hear the yells given it with redoubled vigor, and in the glare of the electric lights Tom saw Eradicate leading along Boomerang, the old mule. "What is it, Rad? What is it?" demanded the young inventor breathlessly. "Trouble, Massa Tom, dat's what it am. Trouble." "I know that, but what kind?" "De worstest kind, I specs, Massa Tom. Listen to it." From the interior of the big shed, not far from the house, Tom and Ned heard a confused jumble of shouts, cries and pleadings, mingled with the rattle of pieces of metal and the banging of bits of wood. And, above all that, like the bellowing of a bull, was noted the rumbling voice of Koku, the giant. "Come on, Ned!" Tom cried. "It's suah trouble all right," went on Eradicate. "My mule Boomerang had a touch of de colic, and I got up to give him some hot drops and walk him around, when I heard de mostest terrific racket sound, and den I 'spected trouble was come." "It isn't coming, it's here!" called Tom, as he sped toward the big shop. Ned was but a step behind him. The big workshop where the aerial warship was being built was, like the other buildings, brilliantly illuminated by the lights Tom had switched on. The young inventor also saw several of his employees speeding toward the same point. Tom was the first to reach the small door of the shed. This was built in one of the two large main doors, which could be swung open when it was desired to slide the Mars in from the ground, and not admit it through the roof. "Look!" cried Tom, pointing. Ned looked over his chum's shoulder and saw the giant, Koku, struggling with 4 men. Powerful men they were, too, and they seemed bent on mischief. For they came at Koku from 4 sides, seeking to hold his hands and feet so that he could not fight them back. On the floor, near where the struggle was taking place, was a coil of rope, and it was evident that it had been the intention of the men to overcome Koku and truss him up, so that he could not interfere with what they intended to do. But Koku was a match for even the 4 men, powerful as they were. "We're here, Koku!" cried Tom. "Watch for an opening, Ned!" he called to his chum. The sound of Tom's voice disconcerted at least 2 of the attackers, for they looked around quickly, and this was fatal to their chances. Though such a big man, Koku was exceptionally quick, and no sooner did he see his advantage, as 2 of the men turned their gaze away from him, than he seized it. Suddenly tearing loose his hands from the grip of the 2 men who had looked around, Koku shot out his right and left fists, and secured good hold on the necks of 2 of his enemies. The other 2, at his back, were endeavoring to pull him over, but the giant's sturdy legs still held. So big was Koku's hands that they almost encircled the necks of his antagonists. Then happened a curious thing. With a shout that might have done credit to some ancient cave dweller of the Stone Age, Koku spread out his mighty arms, and held apart the 2 men he had grasped. In vain they struggled to free themselves from that terrible grip. Their faces turned purple, and their eyes bulged out. "He's choking them to death!" shouted Ned. But Koku was not needlessly cruel. A moment later, with a quick and sudden motion, he bent his arms, bringing toward each other the 2 men he held as captives. Their heads came together with a dull thud, and a second later Koku allowed 2 limp bodies to slip from his grip to the floor. "He's done for them!" Tom cried. "Knocked them unconscious. Good for you, Koku!" The giant grunted, and then, with a quick motion, slung himself around, hoping to bring the enemies at his back within reach of his powerful arms. But there was no need of this. As soon as the other 2 ruffians had seen their companions fall to the floor of the shop, they turned and fled, leaping from an open window. "There they go!" cried Ned. "Some of the other men can chase them," said the young inventor. "We'll tie up the 2 Koku has captured." As he approached nearer to the unconscious captives, Tom uttered a cry of surprise, for he recognized them as 2 of the new men he had employed. "What can this mean?" he asked wonderingly. He glanced toward the window through which the 2 men had jumped to escape, and he was just in time to see one of them run past the open door. The face of this one was under a powerful electric light, and Tom at once recognized the man as Feldman, the worker who had had so much trouble with the trip hammer. "This sure is a puzzle," marveled Tom. "My own men in the plot. But why did they attack Koku?" The giant, bending over the men he had knocked unconscious by beating their heads together, seemed little worse for the attack. "We tie him up," he said grimly, as he brought over the rope that had been intended for himself. End of chapter 13. Of Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship by Victor Appleton. Chapter 14. The First Flight. Little time was lost in securing the 2 men who had been so effectively rendered helpless by Koku's ready, if rough, measures. One of them was showing signs of returning consciousness now, and Tom, not willing to inflict needless pain, even on an enemy, told one of his men, summoned by the alarm, to bring water. Soon the 2 men opened their eyes and looked about them in dazed fashion. Did anything hit me?" asked one meekly. "It must have been a thunderbolt," spoke the other dreamily. "But it didn't look like a storm." "Oh, there was a storm, all right," chuckled Eradicate, who, having left his mule Boomerang outside, came into the shed. "It was a giant storm, all right." The men put their hands to their heads and seemed to comprehend. They looked at the rope that bound their feet. Their forearms had been loosened to allow them to take a drink of water. "What does this mean, Ransom, Kurdy?" asked Tom sternly, when the men seemed able to talk. "Did you attack Koku?" "It looks as though he had the best of us, whether we did or not," said the man Tom knew as Kurdy. "Whew! How my head aches!" "Me sorry," said Koku simply. "Not half as sorry as we are," returned Ransom ruefully. "What does it mean?" asked Tom sternly. "There were 4 of you. Feldman and one other got away." "Oh, trust Feldman for getting away," sneered Kurdy. "He always leaves his friends in the lurch." "Was this a conspiracy?" demanded Tom. The 2 captives looked at one another, sitting bound on the floor of the shop, their backs against some boxes. "I guess it's all up, and we might as well make a clean breast of it," admitted Kurdy. "Perhaps it would be better," said Tom quietly. "Eradicate," he went on, to the colored man, "go to the house and tell Mrs. Baggert that everything is all right and no one hurt." "No one hurt, Massa Tom? What about dem dere fellers?" and the colored man pointed to the captives. "Well, they're not hurt much," and Tom permitted himself a little smile. "I don't want my father to worry. Tell him everything is all right." "All right, Massa Tom. I's gwine right off. I's got to look after mah mule Boomerang, too. I's gwine," and he shuffled away. "Who else besides Feldman got away?" asked Tom, looking alternately at the prisoners. They hesitated a moment about answering. "We might as well give up, I tell you," spoke Kurdy to Ransom. "All right, go ahead. We'll have to take our medicine. I might have known it would turn out this way, going in for this sort of thing. It's the first bit of crooked business I ever tried," the man said earnestly, "and it'll be the last, believe me." "Who was the 4th man?" Tom repeated. "Harrison," answered Kurdy, naming one of the most efficient of the new machinists Tom had hired during the rush. "Harrison, who's been working on the motor?" cried the young inventor. "Yes," said Ransom. "I'm sorry to learn that," Tom went on in a low voice. "He was an expert in his line. But what was your object, anyhow, in attacking Koku?" "We didn't intend to attack him," explained Ransom. "But he came in when we were at work, and as he went for us we tried to stand him off. Then your colored man heard the racket, and well, I guess you know the rest." "But I don't understand why you came into this shed at night," went on Tom. "No one is allowed in here. You had no right, and Koku knew that. What did you want?" "Look here!" exclaimed Kurdy. "I said we'd make a clean breast of it, and we will. We're only a couple of tools, and we were foolish ever to go in with those fellows, or rather in with that Frenchman, who promised us big money if we succeeded." "Succeeded in what?" demanded the young inventor. "In damaging your new aerial warship, or in getting certain parts of it so he could take them away with him." Tom gave a surprised whistle. "A Frenchman!" he exclaimed. "Is he one of the—" "Yes, he's one of the foreign spies," interrupted Ransom. "You'd find it out anyhow, if we didn't tell you. They are after you, Tom Swift, and after your machines. They had vowed to get them by fair means or foul, for some of the European governments are desperate. But we were only tools in their hands. So were Feldman and Harrison, but they knew more about the details. We were only helping them." "Then we must try to capture them," decided Tom. "Ned, see if the chase had any results. I'll look after these chaps, Koku and I." "Oh, we give in," admitted Kurdy. "We know when we've had enough," and he rubbed his head gently where the giant had banged it against that of his fellow conspirator. "Do you mean that you 4 came into this shop at midnight to damage the Mars?" asked Tom. "That's about it, Mr. Swift," replied Kurdy rather shamefacedly. "We were to damage it beyond repair, set fire to the whole place, if need be, and at the same time take away certain vital parts. Harrison, Feldman, Ransom, and I came in, thinking the coast was clear. But Koku must have seen us enter, or he suspected we were here, for he came in after us, and the fight began. We couldn't stop him, and he did for us. I'm rather glad of it, too, for I never liked the work. It was only that they tempted me with a promise of big money." "Who tempted you?" demanded Tom. "That Frenchman, La Foy, he calls himself, and some other foreigners in your shops." "Are there foreigners here?" cried Tom. "Bless my chest protector!" cried Mr. Damon, who had come in and been a silent listener to this. "Can it be possible?" "That's the case," went on Kurdy. A lot of the new men you took on are foreign spies from different European nations. They are trying to learn all they can about your plans, Mr. Swift." "Are they friendly among themselves?" asked Tom. "No. Each one is trying to get ahead of the other. So far the Frenchman seems to have had the best of it, but tonight his plan failed." "Tell me more about it," urged Tom. "That's about all we know," spoke Ransom. "We were only hired to do the rough work. Those higher up didn't appear. Feldman was only a step above us." Then my suspicions of him were justified, thought Tom. He evidently met Lafoy in the woods to make plans, but Koku and Eradicate spoiled them. The two captives seemed willing enough to make a confession, but they did not know much. As they said, they were merely tools, acting for others, and events had happened just as they had said. The four conspirators had managed, by means of a false key, and by disconnecting the burglar alarm, to enter the airship shed. They were about to proceed with their work of destruction when Koku came on the scene. The giant's appearance was due to accident. He acted as a sort of night watchman, making a tour of the buildings, but he entered the shed where the Mars was because, that day, he had left his knife in there, and wanted to get it. Only for that he would not have gone in. When he entered, he surprised the four men. Of course he attacked them at once, and they sprang at him. Then ensued a terrific fight. Eradicate, arising to doctor his mule, as he had said, heard the noise, and saw what was going on. He gave the alarm. "Well, Ned, any luck?" asked Tom, as his chum came in. "No, they got away, Tom. I had a lot of your men out helping me search the grounds, but it wasn't of much use." "Particularly if you depended on some of my men," said Tom bitterly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the place is filled with spies, Ned. But we will sift them out in the morning. This has been a lucky night for me. It was touch and go. Now then, Koku, take these fellows and lock them up somewhere until morning. Ned, you and I will remain on guard here the rest of the night." "I'm with you, Tom." "Will you be a bit easy on us, considering what we told you?" asked Kurdy. "I'll do the best I can," said Tom gently, making no promises. The two captives were put in secure quarters, and the rest of the night passed quietly. During the fight in the airship shed some machinery and tools had been broken, but no great amount of damage was done. Tom and Ned passed the remaining hours of darkness there. A further search was made in the morning for the two conspirators who had escaped, but no trace of them was found. Tom then realized why Feldman was so anxious to be placed in the airplane department. It was in order that he might have easier access to the Mars. A technical charge was made against the two prisoners, sufficient to hold them for some time. Then Tom devoted a day to weeding out the suspected foreigners in his place. All the new men were discharged, though some protested against this action. "Probably I'm hitting some of the innocent in punishing those who, if they had the chance, would become guilty," Tom said to his chum. "But it cannot be helped. I can't afford to take any chances." The Mars was being put in shape for her first flight. The guns, fitted with the recoil shock absorbers, were mounted, and Lieutenant Marbury had returned to go aloft in the big aerial warship. He congratulated Tom on discovering at least one plot in time. "But there may be more," he warned the young inventor. "You are not done with them yet." The Mars was floated out of her hangar, and made ready for an ascent. Tom, Ned, Lieutenant Marbury, Mr. Damon, and several workmen were to be the first passengers. Tom was busy going over the various parts to see that nothing had been forgotten. "Well, I guess we're ready," he finally announced. "All aboard!" "Bless my insurance policy!" exclaimed Mr. Damon. "Now that the time comes, I almost wish I wasn't going." "Nonsense!" exclaimed Tom. "You're not going to back out at the last minute. All aboard! Cast off the ropes!" he cried to the assistants. A moment later the Mars, the biggest airship Tom Swift had ever constructed, arose from the earth like some great bird, and soared aloft. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship by Victor Appleton. Chapter 15. In Danger. "Well, Tom, we're moving!" cried Ned Newton, clapping his chum on the back, as he stood near him in the pilot house. "We're going up, old sport." "Of course we are," replied Tom. You didn't think it wouldn't go up, did you?" "Well, I wasn't quite sure," Ned confessed. "You know, you were so worried about—" "Not about the ship's sailing," interrupted Tom. "It was only the effect the firing of the guns might have. But I think we have that taken care of." "Bless my pincushion!" cried Mr. Damon, as he looked over the rail at the earth below. "We're moving fast, Tom." "Yes, we can make a quicker ascent in this than in most aeroplanes," Tom said, "for they have to go up in a slanting direction. But we can't quite equal their lateral speed." "Just how fast do you think you can travel when you are in first class shape?" asked Lieutenant Marbury, as he noted how the Mars was behaving on this, the first trip. "Well, I set a limit of 75 miles an hour," the young inventor replied, as he shifted various levers and handles, to change the speed of the mechanism. "But I'm afraid we won't quite equal that with all our guns on board. But I'm safe in saying 60, I think." "That will more than satisfy the government requirements," the officer said. "But, of course, your craft will have to come up to expectations and requirements in the matter of armament." "I'll give you every test you want," declared Tom, with a smile. "And now we'll see what the Mars can do when put to it." Up and up went the big dirigible aerial warship. Had you been fortunate enough to have seen her, you would have observed a craft not unlike, in shape, the German Zeppelins, but it differed from those war balloons in several important particulars. Tom's craft was about 600 feet long, and the diameter of the gas bag, amidships, was 60 feet, slightly larger than the largest Zeppelin. Below the bag, which, as I have explained, was made up of a number of gas-tight compartments, hung from wire cables 3 cabins. The forward one was a sort of pilot house, containing various instruments for navigating the ship of the air, observation rooms, gauges for calculating firing ranges, and the steering apparatus. Amidships, suspended below the great bag, were the living and sleeping quarters, where food was cooked and served, and where those who operated the craft could spend their leisure time. Extra supplies were also stored there. At the stern of the big bag was the motor room, where gas was generated to fill the balloon compartments when necessary, where the gasoline and electrical apparatus were installed, and where the real motive power of the craft was located. Here, also, was carried the large quantity of gasoline and oil needed for a long voyage. The Mars could carry sufficient fuel to last for over a week, provided no accidents occurred. There was also an arrangement in the motor compartment so that the ship could be steered and operated from there. This was in case the forward pilot house should be shot away by an enemy. And also, in the motor compartment, were the sleeping quarters for the crew. All 3 suspended cabins were connected by a long covered runway, so that one could pass from the pilot house to the motor room and back again through the amidship cabin. At the extreme end of the big bag were the various rudders and planes, designed to keep the craft on a level keel, automatically, and to enable it to make headway against a strong wind. The motive power consisted of 3 double-bladed wooden propellers, which could be operated together or independently. A powerful gasoline engine was the chief motive power, though there was an auxiliary storage battery which would operate an electrical motor and send the ship along for more than 24 hours in case of accident to the gasoline engines. There were many other pieces of apparatus aboard, some not completely installed, the uses of which I shall mention from time to time, as the story progresses. The gas-generating machine was of importance, for there would be a leakage and shrinking of the vapor from the big bag, and some means must be provided for replenishing it. "You don't seem to have forgotten anything, Tom," said Ned admiringly, as they soared upward. "We can tell better after we've flown about a bit," observed the young inventor, with a smile. "I expect we shall have to make quite a number of changes." "Are you going far?" asked Mr. Damon. "Why, you're not frightened, are you?" inquired Tom. "You've been up in airships with me before." "Oh, no, I'm not frightened!" exclaimed the odd man. "Bless my suspenders, no! But I promised my wife I'd be back this evening, and—" "We'll sail over toward Waterford," broke in Tom, "and I'll drop you down in your front yard." "No, don't do that! Don't, I beg of you!" cried Mr. Damon. "You see, Tom, my wife doesn't like me to make these trips. Of course, I understand there is no danger, and I like them, but it's just as well not to make her worry. You understand?" "Oh, all right," replied Tom, with a laugh. "Well, we're not going far on this trip. What I want to do, most of all, is to test the guns, and see if the recoil check will work as well when we are aloft as it did down on the ground. You know a balloon isn't a very stable base for a gun, even one of light caliber." "No, it certainly is not," agreed Lieutenant Marbury, "and I am interested in seeing how you will overcome the recoil." "We'll have a test soon," announced Tom. Meanwhile the Mars, having reached a considerable height, being up so far, in fact, that the village of Shopton could scarcely be distinguished, Tom set the signal that told the engine room force to start the propellers. This would send them ahead. Some of Tom's most trusted workmen formed the operating crew, the young inventor taking charge of the pilot house himself. "Well, she seems to run all right," observed Lieutenant Marbury, as the big craft surged ahead just below a stratum of white, fleecy clouds. "Yes, but not as fast as I'd like to see her go," Tom replied. "Of course the machinery is new, and it will take some little time for it to wear down smooth. I'll speed her up a little now." They had been running for perhaps 10 minutes when Tom shoved over the hand of an indicator that communicated with the engine room from the pilot house. At once the Mars increased her speed. "She can do it!" cried Ned. "Bless my hat! I should say so!" cried Mr. Damon, for he was standing outside the pilot house just then, on the "bridge," and the sudden increase of speed lifted his hat from his head. "There you are, caught on the fly!" cried Ned, as he put up his hand just in time to catch the article in question. "Thanks. Guess I'd better tie it fast," remarked the odd man, putting his hat on tightly. The aerial warship was put through several evolutions to test her stability, and to each one she responded well, earning the praise of the government officer. Up and down, to one side and the other, around in big circles, and even reversing. Tom sent his craft with a true hand and eye. In a speed test 55 miles was registered against a slight wind, and the young inventor said he knew he could do better than that as soon as some of the machinery was running more smoothly. "And now suppose we get ready for the gun tests," suggested Tom, when they had been running for about an hour. "That's what I'm mostly interested in," said Lieutenant Marbury. "It's easy enough to get several good types of dirigible balloons, but few of them will stand having a gun fired from them, to say nothing of several guns." "Well, I'm not making any rash promises," Tom went on, "but I think we can turn the trick." The armament of the Mars was located around the center cabin. There were 2 large guns, fore and aft, throwing a 4-inch projectile, and 2 smaller calibered quick firers on either beam. The guns were mounted on pedestals that enabled the weapons to fire in almost any direction save straight up, and of course the balloon bag being above them prevented this. However, there was an arrangement whereby a small automatic quick firer could be set up to a platform built on top of the gas envelope itself, and a man stationed there could shoot at a rival airship directly overhead. But the main deck guns could be elevated to an angle of nearly 45 degrees, so they could take care of nearly any hostile aircraft that approached. "But where are the bombs I heard you speaking of?" asked Ned, as they finished looking at the guns. "Here they are," spoke Tom, as he pointed to a space in the middle of the main cabin floor. He lifted a brass plate, and disclosed 3 holes, covered with a strong wire netting that could be removed. "The bombs will be dropped through these holes," explained the young inventor, "being released by magnetic control when the operator thinks he has reached a spot over the enemy's city or fortification where the most damage will be done. I'll show you how they work a little later. Now we'll have a test of some of the guns." Tom called for some of his men to take charge of the steering and running of the Mars, while he and Lieutenant Marbury prepared to fire the 2 larger weapons. This was to be one of the most important tests. Service charges had been put in, though of course no projectiles would be used, since they were then flying over a large city not far from Shopton. "We'll have to wait until we get out over the ocean to give a complete test with a bursting shell," Tom said. He and Lieutenant Marbury were beside a gun, and were about to fire it, when suddenly from the stern of the ship came a ripping, tearing sound, and at the same time confused shouts came from the crew's quarters. "What is it?" cried Tom. "One of the propellers," was the answer. "It's split, and has torn a big hole in the gas bag." "Bless my overshoes!" cried Mr. Damon. "We're going down!" All on board the Mars became aware of a sudden sinking sensation. End of chapter 15. Of Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship by Victor Appleton. Chapter 16. Tom is Worried. "Steady all," came in even tones from Tom Swift. Not for an instant had he lost his composure, for it was an accident, that much was certain, and one that might endanger the lives of all on board. Above the noise of the machinery in the motor room could be heard the thrashing and banging of the broken or loose propeller blade. Just what its condition was could not be told, as a bulge of the gas bag hid it from the view of those gathered about the gun, which was about to be fired, when the alarm was given. "We're sinking!" cried Mr. Damon. "We're going down, Tom!" "That's nothing," was the cool answer. "It is only for a moment. Only a few of the gas compartments can be torn. There will soon be enough additional gas in the others to lift us again." And so it proved. The moment the pressure of the lifting gas in the big oiled silk and aluminum container was lowered, it started the generating machine, and enough extra gas was pumped into the uninjured compartments to compensate for the loss. "We're not falling so fast now," observed Ned. "No, and we'll soon stop falling altogether," calmly declared Tom. "Too bad this accident had to happen, though." "It might have been much worse, my boy," exclaimed the lieutenant. "That's a great arrangement of yours, the automatic gas machine." "It's on the same principle as the air brakes of a trolley car," explained Tom, when a look at the indicators showed that the Mars had ceased falling and remained stationary in the air. Tom had also sent a signal to the engine room to shut off the power, so that the two undamaged propellers, as well as the broken one, ceased revolving. "In a trolley car, you see," Tom went on, when the excitement had calmed down, "as soon as the air pressure in the tanks gets below a certain point, caused by using the air for a number of applications of the brakes, it lets a magnetized bar fall, and this establishes an electrical connection, starting the air pump. The pump forces more air into the tanks until the pressure is enough to throw the pump switch out of connection, when the pump stops. I use the same thing here." "And very clever it is," said Mr. Damon. "Do you suppose the danger is all over, Tom?" "For the time being, yes. But we must unship that damaged propeller and go on with the two." The necessary orders were given, and several men from the engine room at once began the removal of the damaged blades. As several spare ones were carried aboard, one could be put on in place of the broken one, had this been desired. But Tom thought the accident a good chance to see how his craft would act with only 2/3 of her motive force available, so he did not order the damaged propeller replaced. When it was lowered to the deck it was carefully examined. "What made it break?" Ned wanted to know. "That's a question I can't answer," Tom replied. "There may have been a defect in the wood, but I had it all carefully examined before I used it." The propeller was one of the built-up type, with alternate layers of ash and mahogany, but some powerful force had torn and twisted the blades. The wood was splintered and split, and some jagged pieces, flying off at a tangent, so great was the centrifugal force, had torn holes in the strong gas bag. "Did something hit it, or did it hit something?" asked Ned, as he saw Tom carefully examining the broken blades. "Hard to say. I'll have a good look at this when we get back. Just now I want to finish that gun test we didn't get a chance to start." "You don't mean to say you're going to keep on, and with the balloon damaged, are you?" cried Mr. Damon in surprise. "Certainly. Why not?" Tom replied. "In warfare accidents may happen, and if the Mars can't go on, after a little damage like this, what is going to happen when she's fired on by a hostile ship? Of course I'm going on." "Bless my necktie!" ejaculated the old man. "That's the way to talk!" exclaimed Lieutenant Marbury. "I'm with you." There really was very little danger in proceeding. The Mars was just as buoyant as before, for more gas had been automatically made and forced into the uninjured compartments of the bag. At the same time enough sand ballast had been allowed to run out to make the weight to be lifted less in proportion to the power remaining. True, the speed would be less, with 2 propellers instead of 3, and the craft would not steer as well, with the torn ends of the gas bag floating out behind. But this made a nearer approach to war conditions, and Tom was always glad to give his inventions the most severe tests possible. So, after a little while, during which it was seen that the Mars was proceeding almost normally, the matter of discharging the guns was taken up again. The weapons were all ready to fire, and when Tom had attached the pressure gauges to note how much energy was expended in the recoil, he gave the word to fire. The two big weapons were discharged together, and for a moment after the report echoed out among the cloud masses every soul on the ship feared another accident had happened. For the big craft rolled and twisted, and seemed about to turn turtle. Her forward progress was halted momentarily, and a cry of fear came from several of the members of the crew, who had had only a little experience in aircraft. "What's the matter?" cried Ned. "Something go wrong?" "A little," admitted Tom, with a rueful look on his face. "Those recoil checks didn't work as well in practice as they did in theory." "Are you sure they're strong enough?" asked Lieutenant Marbury. "I thought so," spoke Tom. "I'll put more tension on the spring next time." "Bless my watch chain!" cried Mr. Damon. "You aren't going to fire those guns again, are you, Tom?" "Why not? We can't tell what's the matter, nor get things right without experimenting. There's no danger." "No danger? Don't you call nearly upsetting the ship danger?" "Oh, well, if she turns over she'll right herself again," Tom said. "The center of gravity is low, you see. She can't float in any position but right side up, though she may turn over once or twice." "Excuse me," said Mr. Damon firmly. "I'd rather go down, if it's all the same to you. If my wife ever knew I was here I'd never hear the last of it." "We'll go down soon," Tom promised. "But I must fire a couple of shots more. You wouldn't call the recoil checks a success, would you?" and the young inventor appealed to the government inspector. "No, I certainly would not," was the prompt answer. "I am sorry, too, for they seemed to be just what was needed. Of course I understand this is not an official test, and I am not obliged to make a report of this trial, but had it been, I should have had to score against you." "I realize that, and I'm not asking any favors, but I'll try it again with the recoil checks tightened up. I think the hydrostatic valves were open too much, also." Preparations were now made for firing the 4-inch guns once more. All this while the Mars had been speeding around in space, being about 2 miles up in the air. Tom's craft was not designed to reach as great an elevation as would be possible in an airplane, since to work havoc on an enemy's fortifications by means of aerial bombs they do not need to be dropped from a great height. In fact, experiments in Germany have shown that bombs falling from a great height are less effective than those falling from an airship nearer the earth. For a bomb, falling from a height of 2 miles, acquires enough momentum to penetrate far into the earth, so that much of the resultant explosive force is expended in a downward direction, and little damage is done to the fortifications. A bomb dropped from a lower altitude, expending its force on all sides, does much more damage. On the other hand, in destroying buildings it has been found desirable to drop a bomb from a good height so that it may penetrate even a protected roof, and explode inside. Once more Tom made ready to fire, this time having given the recoil checks greater resistance. But though there was less motion imparted to the airship when the guns were discharged, there was still too much for comfort, or even safety. "Well, something's wrong, that's sure," remarked Tom, in rather disappointed tones, as he noted the effects of the second shots. "If we get as much recoil from the two guns, what would happen if we fired them all at once?" "Don't do it! Don't do it, I beg of you!" entreated Mr. Damon. "Bless my toothbrush, don't do it!" "I won't, just at present," Tom said ruefully. "I'm afraid I'll have to begin all over again and proceed along new lines." "Well, perhaps you will," said the lieutenant. "But you may invent something much better than anything you have now. There is no great rush. Take your time, and do something good." "Oh, I'll get busy on it right away," Tom declared. "We'll go down now, and start right to work. I'm afraid, Ned, that our idea of a door spring check isn't going to work." "I might have known my idea wouldn't amount to anything," said the young bank clerk. "Oh, the idea is all right," declared Tom, "but it wants modifying. There's more power to those recoils than I figured, though our first experiments seemed to warrant us in believing that we had solved the problem." "Are you going to try the bomb dropping device?" asked the lieutenant. "Yes, there can't be any recoil from that," Tom said. "I'll drop a few blank ones and see how accurate the range finders are." While his men were getting ready for this test, Tom bent over the broken propeller, looking from that to the recoil checks, which had not come up to expectations. Then he shook his head in a worried and puzzled manner. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship by Victor Appleton. Chapter 17. An Ocean Flight. Dropping bombs from an airplane, or a dirigible balloon, is a comparatively simple matter. Of course, there are complications that may ensue, from the danger of carrying high explosives in the limited quarters of an airship, with its inflammable gasoline fuel, and ever-present electric spark, to the possible premature explosion of the bomb itself. But they seem to be considered minor details now. On the other hand, while it is comparatively easy to drop a bomb from a moving airplane or dirigible balloon, it is another matter to make the bomb fall just where it will do the most damage to the enemy. It is not easy to gauge distances high up in the air, and then, too, allowance must be made for the speed of the aircraft, the ever-increasing velocity of a falling body, and the deflection caused by air currents. The law of velocity governing falling bodies is well known. It varies, of course, according to the height, but in general a body falling freely toward the earth, as all high school boys know, is accelerated at the rate of 32 feet per second. This law has been taken advantage of by the French in the present European war. The French drop from balloons, or aeroplanes, a steel dart about the size of a lead pencil, and sharpened in about the same manner. Dropping from a height of a mile or so, that dart will acquire enough velocity to penetrate a man from his head all the way through his body to his feet. But in dropping bombs from an airship the damage intended does not so much depend on velocity. It is necessary to know how fast the bomb falls in order to know when to set the time fuse that will explode it, though some bombs will explode on concussion. At airplane meets there are often bomb-dropping contests, and balls filled with a white powder, that will make a dust cloud on falling and so show where they strike, are used to demonstrate the birdman's accuracy. "We'll see how our bomb release works," Tom went on, "but we'll have to descend a bit in order to watch the effect." "You're not going to use real bombs, are you, Tom?" asked Ned. "Indeed not. Just chalk dust ones for practice. Now, here is where the bombs will be placed," and he pointed to the 3 openings in the floor of the amidship cabin. The wire nettings were taken out and one could look down through the holes to the earth below, the ground being nearer now, as Tom had let out some of the lifting gas. "Here is the range finder and the speed calculator," the young inventor went on as he indicated the various instruments. "The operator sits here, where he can tell when it is the most favorable moment for releasing the bomb." Tom took his place before a complicated set of instruments, and began manipulating them. One of his assistants, under the direction of Lieutenant Marbury, placed in the 3 openings bombs, made of light cardboard, just the size of a regular bomb, but filled with a white powder that would, on breaking, make a dust cloud which could be observed from the airship. "I have first to determine where I want to drop the bomb," Tom explained, "and then I have to get my distance from it on the range finder. Next I have to know how fast I am traveling, and how far up in the air I am, to tell what the velocity of the falling bomb will attain at a certain time. This I can do by means of these instruments, some of which I have adapted from those used by the government," he said, with a nod to the officer. "That's right. Take all the information you can get," was the smiling response. "We will now assume that the bombs are in place in the holes in the floor of the cabin," Tom went on. "As I sit here I have before me 3 buttons. They control the magnets that hold the bombs in place. If I press one of the buttons it breaks the electrical current, the magnet no longer has any attraction, and it releases the explosive. Now look down. I'm going to try and drop a chalk bomb near that stone fence." The Mars was then flying over a large field, and a stone fence was in plain view. "Here she goes!" cried Tom, as he made some rapid calculations from his gauge instruments. There was a little click, and the chalk bomb dropped. There was a plate glass floor in part of the cabin, and through this the progress of the pasteboard bomb could be observed. "She'll never go anywhere near the fence," declared Ned. "You let it drop too soon, Tom." "Did I? You just watch. I had to allow for the momentum that would be given the bomb by the forward motion of the balloon." Hardly had Tom spoken than a puff of white was seen on the very top of the fence. "There it goes!" cried the lieutenant. "You did the trick, Swift." "Yes, I thought I would. Well, that shows my gauges are correct, anyhow. Now we'll try the other 2 bombs." In succession they were released from the bottom of the cabin, at other designated objects. The second one was near a tree. It struck within 5 feet, which was considered good. "And I'll let the last one down near that scarecrow in the field," said Tom, pointing to a ragged figure in the middle of a patch of corn. Down went the cardboard bomb, and so good was the aim of the young inventor that the white dust arose in a cloud directly back of the scarecrow. Then a queer thing happened, for the figure seemed to come to life, and Ned, who was watching through a telescope, saw a very much excited farmer looking up with an expression of the greatest wonder on his face. He saw the balloon over his head and shook his fist at it, evidently thinking he had had a narrow escape. But the pasteboard bomb was so light that, had it hit him, he would not have been injured, though he might have been well dusted. "Why, that was a man! Bless my pocketbook!" cried Mr. Damon. "I guess it was," agreed Tom. "I took it for a scarecrow." "Well, it proved the accuracy of your aim, at any rate," observed Lieutenant Marbury. "The bomb-dropping device of your aerial warship is perfect. I can testify to that." "And I'll have the guns fixed soon, so there'll be no danger of a recoil, too," added Tom Swift, with a determined look on his face. "What's next?" asked Mr. Damon, looking at his watch. "I really ought to be home, Tom." "We're going back now, and down. Are you sure you don't want me to drop you in your own front yard, or even on your roof? I think I could manage that." "Bless my stovepipe, no, Tom! My wife would have hysterics. Just land me at Shopton, and I'll take a car home." The damaged airship seemed little the worse for the test to which she had been subjected, and made her way at good speed in the direction of Tom's home. Several little experiments were tried on the way back. They all worked well, and the only 2 problems Tom had to solve were the taking care of the recoil from the guns and finding out why the propeller had broken. A safe landing was made, and the Mars once more put away in her hangar. Mr. Damon departed for his home, and Lieutenant Marbury again took up his residence in the Swift household. "Well, Tom, how did it go?" asked his father. "Not so very well. Too much recoil from the guns." "I was afraid so. You'd better drop this line of work and go at something else." "No, Dad!" Tom cried. "I'm going to make this work. I never had anything stump me yet, and I'm not going to begin now." "Well, that's a good spirit to show," said the aged inventor, with a shake of his head. "But I don't believe you'll succeed, Tom." "Yes, I will, Dad. You just wait." Tom decided to begin on the problem of the propeller first, as that seemed more simple. He knew that the gun question would take longer. "Just what are you trying to find out, Tom?" asked Ned, a few nights later, when he found his chum looking at the broken parts of the propeller. "Trying to discover what made this blade break up and splinter that way. It couldn't have been centrifugal force, for it wasn't strong enough." Tom was poking away amid splinters and bits of broken wood, when he suddenly uttered an exclamation and held up something. "Look!" he cried. "I believe I've found it." "What?" asked Ned. "The thing that weakened the propeller. Look at this, and smell." He held out a piece of wood toward Ned. The bank employee saw where a half-round hole had been bored in what remained of the blade, and from that hole came a peculiar odor. "It's some kind of acid," ventured Ned. "That's it!" cried Tom. "Someone bored a hole in the propeller and put in some sort of receptacle or capsule containing a corrosive acid. In due time, which happened to be when we took our first flight, the acid ate through whatever it was contained in, and then attacked the wood of the propeller blade. It weakened the wood so that the force used in whirling it around broke it." "Are you sure of that?" asked Ned. "As sure as I am that I'm here. Now I know what caused the accident." "But who would play such a trick?" asked Ned. "We might all have been killed." "Yes, I know we might," said Tom. "It must be the work of some of those foreign spies whose first plot we nipped in the bud. I must tell Marbury of this, but don't mention it to Dad." "I won't," promised Ned. Lieutenant Marbury agreed with Tom that someone had surreptitiously bored a small hole in the propeller blade and had inserted a corrosive acid that would take many hours to operate. The hole had been varnished over, probably, so it would not show. "And that means I've got to examine the other 2 blades," Tom said. "They may be doctored, too." But they did not prove to be. A careful examination showed nothing wrong. An effort was made to find out who had tried to destroy the Mars in midair, but it came to nothing. The 2 men in custody declared they knew nothing of it, and there was no way of proving that they did. Meanwhile the torn gas bag was repaired, and Tom began working on the problem of doing away with the gun recoil. He tried several schemes, and almost was on the point of giving up, when suddenly he received a hint by reading an account of how the recoil was taken care of on some of the German Zeppelins. The guns there were made double, with the extra barrel filled with water or sand, that could be shot out as was the regular charge. As both barrels were fired at the same time, and in opposite directions, with the same amount of powder, one neutralized the other, and the recoil was cancelled, the ship remaining steady after fire. "By Jove! I believe that will do the trick!" cried Tom. "I'm going to try it." "Good luck to you!" cried Ned. It was no easy matter to change all the guns of the Mars, and fit them with double barrels, but by working day and night shifts Tom managed it. Meanwhile a careful watch was kept over the shops. Several new men applied for work, and some of them were suspicious enough in looks, but Tom took on no new hands. Finally the new guns were made, and tried with the Mars held on the ground. They behaved perfectly, the shooting of sand or water from the dummy barrel neutralizing the shot from the service barrel. "And now to see how it works in practice!" cried Tom one day. "Are you with me for a long flight, Ned?" "I sure am." The next evening the Mars, with a larger crew than before, and with Tom, Ned, Mr. Damon, and Lieutenant Marbury aboard, set sail. "But why start at night?" asked Ned. "You'll see in the morning," Tom answered. The Mars flew slowly all night, life aboard her at about the level of the clouds, going on almost as naturally as though the occupants of the cabins were on the earth. Excellent meals were served. "But when are you going to try the guns?" asked Ned, as he got ready to turn in. "Tell you in the morning," replied Tom with a smile. And in the morning, when Ned looked down through the plate glass in the cabin floor, he uttered a cry. "Why, Tom, we're over the ocean!" he cried. "I rather thought we'd be," was the calm reply. "I told George to head straight for the Atlantic. Now we'll have a test with service charges and projectiles." End of chapter 17. Of Tom Swift and his aerial warship. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom Swift and his aerial warship by Victor Appleton. Chapter 18. In a Storm. Surprise, for the moment, held Mr. Damon, Ned, and Lieutenant Marbury speechless. They looked from the heaving waters of the ocean below them to the young pilot of the Mars. He smiled at their astonishment. What does it mean, Tom?" asked Ned. "You never said you were going to take a trip as far as this." "That's right," chimed in Mr. Damon. "Bless my nightcap! If I had known I was going to be brought so far away from home, I'd never have come." "You're not so very far from Waterford," put in Tom. "We didn't make any kind of speed coming from Shopton, and we could be back again inside of 4 hours if we had to." "Then you didn't travel fast during the night?" asked the government man. "No, we just drifted along," Tom answered. "I gave orders to run the machinery slowly, as I wanted to get it in good shape for the other tests that will come soon. But I told George, whom I left in charge when I turned in, to head for New York. I wanted to get out over the ocean to try the guns with the new recoil arrangement." "Well, we're over the ocean all right," spoke Ned, as he looked down at the heaving waters. "It isn't the first time," replied Tom cheerfully. "Koku, you may serve breakfast now," for the giant had been taken along as a sort of cook and waiter. Koku manifested no surprise or alarm when he found the airship floating over the sea. Whatever Tom did was right to him. He had great confidence in his master. "No, it isn't the first time we've taken a water flight," spoke Ned. "I was only surprised at the suddenness of it, that's all." "It's my first experience so far out above the water," observed Lieutenant Marbury. "Though of course I've sailed on many seas. Why, we're out of sight of land." "About 10 miles out, yes," admitted Tom. "Far enough to make it safe to test the guns with real projectiles. That is what I want to do." "And we've been running all night?" asked Mr. Damon. "Yes, but at slow speed. The engines are in better shape now than ever before," Tom said. "Well, if you're ready, we'll have breakfast." The meal was served by Koku with as much unconcern as though they were in the Swift homestead back in Shopton instead of floating near the clouds. And while it was being eaten in the main cabin, and while the crew was having breakfast in their quarters, the aerial warship was moving along over the ocean in charge of George Watson, one of Tom's engineers, who was stationed in the forward pilot house. "So you're going to give the guns a real test this time, is that it, Tom?" asked Ned, as he pushed back his plate, a signal that he had eaten enough. "That's about it." "But don't you think it's a bit risky out over the water this way? Supposing something should happen?" Ned hesitated. "You mean we might fall?" asked Tom with a smile. "Yes, or turn upside down." "Nothing like that could happen. I'm so sure that I have solved the problem of the recoil of the guns that I'm willing to take chances. But if any of you want to get off the Mars while the test is being made, I have a small boat I can lower and let you row about in that until—" "No, thank you," interrupted Mr. Damon, as he looked below. There was quite a heavy swell on, and the ocean did not appear very attractive. They would be much more comfortable in the big Mars. "I think you won't have any trouble," asserted Lieutenant Marbury. "I believe Tom Swift has the right idea about the guns, and there will be so small a shock from the recoil that it will not be noticeable." "We'll soon know," spoke Tom. "I'm going to get ready for the test now." They were now well out from shore, over the Atlantic, but to make certain no ships would be endangered by the projectiles, Tom and the others searched the waters to the horizon with powerful glasses. Nothing was seen, and the work of loading the guns was begun. The bomb tubes in the main cabin were also to be given a test. As service charges were to be used, and as the projectiles were filled with explosives, great care was needed in handling them. "We'll try dropping bombs first," Tom suggested. "We know they will work, and that will be so much out of the way." To make the test a severe one, small floating targets were first dropped overboard from the Mars. Then the aerial warship, circling about, came on toward them. Tom, seated at the range finders, pressed the button that released the shells containing the explosives. One after another they dropped into the sea, exploding as they fell, and sending up a great column of salt water. "Every one a hit," reported Lieutenant Marbury, who was keeping score. "That's good," responded Tom. "But the others won't be so easy. We have nothing to shoot at." They had to fire the other guns without targets at which to aim. But, after all, it was the absence of recoil they wanted to establish, and this could be done without shooting at any particular object. One after another the guns were loaded. As has been explained, they were now made double, one barrel carrying the projectile and the other a charge of water. "Are you ready?" asked Tom, when it was time to fire. Lieutenant Marbury, Ned, and Mr. Damon were helping, by being stationed at the pressure gauges to note the results. "All ready," answered Ned. "Do you think we'd better put on life preservers, Tom?" asked Mr. Damon. "Nonsense! What for?" "In case anything happens." "Nothing will happen. Look out now! I'm going to fire." The guns were to be fired simultaneously by means of an electric current, when Tom pressed a button. "Here they go!" exclaimed the young inventor. There was a moment of waiting, and then came a thundering roar. The Mars trembled, but she did not shift to either side from an even keel. From one barrel of the guns shot out the explosive projectiles, and from the other spurted a jet of water, sent out by a charge of powder equal in weight to that which forced out the shot. As the projectile was fired in one direction, and the water in one directly opposite, the two discharges neutralized one another. Out flew the pointed steel shells to fall harmlessly into the sea, where they exploded, sending up columns of water. "Well!" cried Tom as the echoes died away. "How was it?" "Couldn't have been better," declared Lieutenant Marbury. "There wasn't the least shock of recoil. Tom Swift, you have solved the problem, I do believe. Your aerial warship is a success." "I'm glad to hear you say so. There are one or two little things that need changing, but I really think I have about what the United States government wants." "I am also of that belief, Tom. If only—" The officer stopped suddenly. "Well?" asked Tom suggestively. "I was going to say, if only those foreign spies don't make trouble." "I think we've seen the last of them," Tom declared. "Now we'll go on with the tests." More guns were fired, singly and in batteries, and in each case the Mars stood the test perfectly. The double barrel had solved the recoil problem. For some little time longer they remained out over the sea, going through some evolutions to test the rudder control, and then, as their present object had been accomplished, Tom gave orders to head back to Shopton, which place was reached in due time. "Well, Tom, how was it?" asked Mr. Swift, for though his son had said nothing to his friends about the prospective test, the aged inventor knew about it. "Successful, Dad, in every particular. "That's good. I didn't think you could do it, but you did. I tell you it isn't much that can get the best of a Swift," exclaimed the aged man proudly. "Oh, by the way, Tom, here's a telegram that came while you were gone," and he handed his son the yellow envelope. Tom ripped it open with a single gesture, and in a flash his eyes took in the words. He read: "Look out for spies during trial flights." The message was signed with a name Tom did not recognize. "Any bad news?" asked Mr. Swift. "No," replied Tom, as he crumpled up the paper and thrust it into his pocket. "No bad news, Dad." "Well, I'm glad to hear that," went on Mr. Swift. "I don't like telegrams." When Tom showed the message to Lieutenant Marbury, that official, after one glance at the signature, said: "Pearson, eh? Well, when he sends out a warning it generally means something." "Who's Pearson?" asked Tom. "Head of the Secret Service Department that has charge of this airship matter. There must be something in the wind, Tom." Extra precautions were taken about the shops. Strangers were not permitted to enter, and all future work on the Mars was kept secret. Nevertheless, Tom was worried. He did not want his work to be spoiled just when it was about to be a success. For that it was a success, Lieutenant Marbury assured him. The government man said he would have no hesitation in recommending the purchase of Tom's aerial warship. "There's just one other test I want to see made," he said. "What is that?" Tom inquired. "In a storm. You know we can't always count on having good weather, and I'd like to see how she behaves in a gale." "You shall," declared the young inventor. For the next week, during which finishing touches were put on the big craft, Tom anxiously waited for signs of a storm. At last they came. Danger signals were put up all along the coast, and warnings were sent out broadcast by the Weather Bureau at Washington. One dull gray morning Tom roused his friends early and announced that the Mars was going up. "A big storm is headed this way," Tom said, "and we'll have a chance to see how she behaves in it." And even as the flight began, the forerunning wind and rain came in a gust of fury. Into the midst of it shot the big aerial warship, with her powerful propellers beating the moisture-laden air. End of chapter 18.
Chapter 19 of Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Sherris. Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship by Victor Appleton. Chapter 19. Queer Happenings. "Say, Tom, are you sure you're all right?" "Of course I am. What do you mean?" It was Ned Newton who asked the question, and Tom Swift who answered it. The chums were in the pilot house of the dipping, swaying Mars, which was nosing her way into the storm, fighting on an upward slant, trying, if possible, to get above the area of atmospheric disturbance. "Well, I mean, are you sure your craft will stand all this straining, pulling, and hauling?" went on Ned, as he clung to a brass handrail built in the side of the pilot house wall for the very purpose to which it was now being put. "If she doesn't stand it, she's no good," cried Tom, as he clung to the steering wheel, which was nearly torn from his hands by the deflections of the rudders. "Well, it's taking a big chance, it seems to me," went on Ned, as he peered through the rain-spotted bull's-eyes of the pilot house. "There's no danger," declared Tom. "I wanted to give the ship the hardest test possible before I formally offered her to the government. If she can't stand a blow like this, she isn't what I thought her, and I'll have to build another. But I'm sure she will stand the racket, Ned. She's built strongly, and even if part of the gas bag is carried away, as it was when our propeller shattered, we can still sail. If you think this is anything, wait until we turn about and begin to fight our way against the wind." "Are you going to do that, Tom?" "I certainly am. We're going with the gale now, to see what is the highest rate of speed we can attain. Pretty soon I'm going to turn her around and see if she can make any headway in the other direction. Of course, I know she won't make much, if any, speed against the gale, but I must give her that test." "Well, Tom, you know best, of course," admitted Ned, "but to me it seems like taking a big risk." And indeed it did seem, not only to Ned, but to some of the experienced men of Tom's crew, that the young inventor was taking more chances than ever before, and Tom, as my old readers well know, had in his career taken some big ones. The storm grew worse as the day progressed, until it was a veritable hurricane of wind and rain. The warnings of the Weather Bureau had not been exaggerated, but through the fierce blow the Mars fought her way. As Tom had said, she was going with the wind. This was comparatively easy. But what would happen when she headed into the storm? Mr. Damon, in the main cabin, sat and looked at Lieutenant Marbury, the eccentric man now and then blessing something as he happened to think of it. Do you think we are in any danger?" he finally asked. "Not at present," replied the government expert. "You mean we will be later?" "It's hard to say. I guess Tom Swift knows his business, though." "Bless my accident insurance policy," murmured Mr. Damon. "I wish I had stayed at home. If my wife ever hears of this—" He did not seem able to finish the sentence. In the engine room the crew were busy over the various machines. Some of the apparatus was being strained to keep the ship on her course in the powerful wind, and would be under a worse stress when Tom turned his craft about. But, so far, nothing had given way, and everything was working smoothly. As hour succeeded hour and nothing happened, the timid ones aboard began to take more courage. Tom never for a moment lost heart. He knew what his craft could do, and he had taken her up in a terrific storm with a definite purpose in view. He was the calmest person aboard, with the exception, perhaps, of Koku. The giant did not seem to know what fear was. He depended entirely on Tom, and as long as his young master had charge of matters, the giant was content to obey orders. There was to be no test of the guns this time. They had worked sufficiently well, and, if need be, could have been fired in the gale. But Tom did not want his men to take unnecessary risks, nor was he foolhardy himself. "We'll have our hands full when we turn around and head into the wind," he said to his chum. "That will be enough." "Then you're really going to give Mars that test?" "I surely am. I don't want any comebacks from Uncle Sam after he accepts my aerial warship. I've guaranteed that she'll stand up and make headway against a gale, and I'm going to prove it." Lieutenant Marbury was told of the coming trial, and he prepared to take official note of it. While matters were being gotten in readiness, Tom turned the wheel over to his assistant pilot and went to the engine room to see that everything was in good shape to cope with any emergency. The rudders had been carefully examined before the flight was made, to make sure they would not fail, for on them depended the progress of the ship against the powerful wind. "I rather guess those foreign spies have given up trying to do Tom an injury," remarked Ned to the lieutenant as they sat in the main cabin, listening to the howl of the wind and the dash of the rain. "Well, I certainly hope so," was the answer, "but I wouldn't be too sure. The folks in Washington evidently think something is likely to happen, or they wouldn't have sent that warning telegram." "But we haven't seen anything of the spies," Ned remarked. "No, but that isn't any sign they are not getting ready to make trouble. This may be the calm before the storm. Tom must still be on the lookout. It isn't as though his inventions alone were in danger, for they would not hesitate to inflict serious personal injury if their plans were thwarted. They must be desperate." "They are. But here comes Tom now. He looks as though something new was about to happen." "Take care of yourselves now," advised the young aero inventor as he entered the cabin, finding it hard work to close the door against the terrific wind pressure. "Why?" asked Ned. "Because we are going to turn around and fight our way back against the gale. We may be turned topsy-turvy for a second or two." "Bless my shoehorn!" cried Mr. Damon. "Do you mean upside down, Tom?" "No, not that exactly, but watch out!" Tom went forward to the pilot house, followed by Ned and the lieutenant. The latter wanted to take official note of what happened. Tom relieved the man at the wheel, and gradually began to alter the direction of the craft. At first no change was noticeable. So strong was the force of the wind that it seemed as though the Mars was going in the same direction. But Ned, noticing a direction compass on the wall, saw that the needle was gradually shifting. "Hold fast!" cried Tom suddenly. Then, with a quick shift of the rudder, something happened. It seemed as though the Mars was trying to turn over and slide along on her side, or as if she wanted to turn about and scud before the gale instead of facing it. But Tom held her to the reverse course. "Can you get her around?" cried the lieutenant above the roar of the gale. I'm going to," muttered Tom through his set teeth. Inch by inch he fought the big craft through the storm. Inch by inch the indicator showed the turning, until at last the grip of the gale was overcome. "Now she's headed right into it!" cried Tom in exultation. "She's nosing right into it!" And the Mars was. There was no doubt of it. She had succeeded, under Tom's direction, in changing squarely about, and was now going against the wind instead of with it. "But we can't expect to make much speed," Tom said as he signaled for more power, for he had lowered it somewhat in making the turn. But Tom himself scarcely had reckoned on the force of his craft, for as the propellers whirled more rapidly, the aerial warship did begin to make headway, and that in the teeth of a terrific wind. "She's doing it, Tom! She's doing it!" cried Ned exultingly. "I believe she is," agreed the lieutenant. "Well, so much the better," Tom said, trying to be calm. "If she can keep this up a little while, I'll give her a rest and we'll go up above the storm area and beat back home." The Mars, so far, had met every test. Tom had decided on 10 minutes more of gale fighting, when from the tube that communicated with the engine room came a shrill whistle. "See what that is, Ned," Tom directed. "Yes?" called Ned into the mouthpiece. "What's the matter?" "Short circuit in the big motor," was the reply. "We've got to run on storage battery. Send Tom back here. Something queer has happened." End of chapter 19. Recording by Scott Sherris, Atlanta, Georgia, USA. Chapter 20 of Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Sherris. Tom Swift and His Aerial Warship by Victor Appleton. Chapter 20. The Stowaways. Ned repeated the message breathlessly. "Short circuit!" gasped Tom. "Run on storage battery. I'll have to see to that. Take the wheel, somebody." "Wouldn't it be better to turn about and run before the wind so as not to put too great a strain on the machinery?" asked Lieutenant Marbury. "Perhaps," agreed Tom. "Hold her this way, though, until I see what's wrong." Ned and the government man took the wheel, while Tom hurried along the runway leading from the pilot house to the machinery cabin. The gale was still blowing fiercely. The young inventor cast a hasty look about the interior of the place as he entered. He sniffed the air suspiciously and was aware of the odor of burning insulation. "What happened?" he asked, noting that already the principal motive power was coming from the big storage battery. The shift had been made automatically when the main motor gave out. "It's hard to say," was the answer of the chief engineer. "We were running along all right, and we got your word to switch on more power after the turn. We did that all right, and she was running as smooth as a sewing machine, when all of a sudden she short-circuited and the storage battery cut in automatically." "Think you put too heavy a load on the motor?" Tom asked. "Couldn't have been that. The shunt box would have taken that up, and the circuit breaker would have worked, saving us a burnout. And that's what happened, a burnout. The motor will have to be rewound." "Well, it's no use trying to fight this gale with a storage battery," Tom said after a moment's thought. "We'll run before it. That's the easiest way. Then we'll try to rise above the wind." He sent the necessary message to the pilot house. A moment later the shift was made, and once more the Mars was scudding before the storm. Then Tom gave his serious attention to what had happened in the engine room. As he bent over the burnt-out motor, looking at the big shiny connections, he saw something that startled him. With a quick motion, Tom Swift picked up a bar of copper. It was hot to the touch, so hot that he dropped it with a cry of pain, though he had let it go so quickly that the burn was only momentary. "What's the matter?" asked Jerry Mound, Tom's engineer. "Matter?" cried Tom. "A whole lot is the matter. That copper bar is what made the short circuit. It's hot yet from the electric current. How did it fall into the motor connections?" The engine room force gathered about the young inventor. No one could explain how the copper bar came to be where it was. Certainly no one of Tom's employees had put it there, and it could not have fallen by accident, for the motor connections were protected by a mesh of wire, and a hand would have to be thrust under them to put the bar in place. Tom gave a quick look at his men. He knew he could trust them, every one, but this was a queer happening. For a moment Tom did not know what to think, and then, as the memory of that warning telegram came to him, he had an idea. "Were any strangers in this cabin before the start was made?" he asked Mr. Mound. "Not that I know of," was the answer. "Well, there may be some here now," Tom said grimly. "Look about." But a careful search revealed no one. Yet the young inventor was sure the bar of copper, which had done the mischief of short-circuiting the motor, had been put in place deliberately. In reality, there was no danger to the craft. since there was power enough in the storage battery to run it for several hours. But the happening showed Tom he had still to reckon with his enemies. He looked at the height gauge on the wall of the motor room and noted that the Mars was going up. In accordance with Tom's instructions, they were sending her above the storm area. Once there, with no gale to fight, they could easily beat their way back to a point above Shopton and make the best descent possible. And that was done while, under Tom's direction, his men took the damaged motor apart with a view to repairing it. "What was it, Tom?" asked Ned, coming back to join his chum, after George Ventor, the assistant pilot, had taken charge of the wheel. "I don't know exactly, Ned," was the answer, "but I feel certain that some of my enemies came aboard here and worked this mischief." "Your enemies came aboard?" "Yes, and they must be here now. The placing of that copper bar proves it." "Then let's make a search and find them, Tom. It must be some of those foreign spies." "Just what I think." But a more careful search of the craft than the one Tom had casually made revealed the presence of no one. All the crew and helpers were accounted for, and, as they had been in Tom's service for some time, they were beyond suspicion. Yet the fact remained that a seemingly human agency had acted to put the main motor out of commission. Tom could not understand it. "Well, it sure is queer," observed Ned as the search came to nothing. "It's worse than queer," declared Tom. "It's alarming. I don't know when I'll be safe if we have ghosts aboard." "Ghosts?" repeated Ned. "Well, when we can't find out who put the bar in place, I might as well admit it was a ghost," spoke Tom. "Certainly, if it was done by a man, he didn't jump overboard after doing it, and he isn't here now. It sure is queer." Ned agreed with the last sentence, at any rate. In due time, the Mars, having fought her way above the storm, came over Shopton, and then, the wind having somewhat died out, she fought her way down, and after no little trouble was housed in the hangar. Tom cautioned his friends and workmen to say nothing to his father about the mysterious happening on board. "I'll just tell him we had a slight accident, and let it go at that," Tom decided. "No use in causing him worry." "But what are you going to do about it?" asked Ned. "I'm going to keep careful watch over the aerial warship, at any rate," declared Tom. "If there's a hidden enemy aboard, I'll starve him out." Accordingly, a guard, under the direction of Koku, was posted about the big shed, but nothing came of it. No stranger was observed to sneak out of the ship after it had been deserted by the crew. The mystery seemed deeper than ever. It took nearly a week to repair the big motor, and during this time Tom put some improvements on the airship and added the finishing touches. He was getting it ready for the final government test, for the authorities in Washington had sent word that they would have Captain Warner, in addition to Lieutenant Marbury, make the final inspection and write a report. Meanwhile, several little things occurred to annoy Tom. He was besieged with applications from new men who wanted to work, and many of these men seemed to be foreigners. Tom was sure they were either spies of some European nations, or the agents of spies, and they got no further than the outer gate. But some strangers did manage to sneak into the works, though they were quickly detected and sent about their business. Also, once or twice, small fires were discovered in outbuildings, but they were soon extinguished with little damage. Extra vigilance was the watchword. "And yet, with all my precautions, they may get me or damage something," declared Tom. "It is very annoying." "It is," agreed Ned, "and we must be doubly on the lookout." So impressed was Ned with the necessity for caution that he arranged to take his vacation at this time so as to be on hand to help his chum, if necessary. The Mars was nearing completion. The repaired motor was better than ever, and everything was in shape for the final test. Mr. Damon was persuaded to go along, and Koku was to be taken, as well as the two government officials. The night before the trip, the guards about the airship shed were doubled, and Tom made 2 visits to the place before midnight, but there was no alarm. Consequently, when the Mars started off on her final test, it was thought that all danger from the spies was over. "She certainly is a beauty," said Captain Warner as the big craft shot upward. "I shall be interested in seeing how she stands gunfire, though." "Oh, she'll stand it," declared Lieutenant Marbury. The trip was to consume several days of continuous flying, to test the engines. A large supply of food and ammunition was aboard. It was after supper of the first day out, and our friends were seated in the main cabin laying out a program for the next day, when sudden yells came from a part of the motor cabin devoted to storage. Koku, who had been sent to get out a barrel of oil, was heard to shout. "What's up?" asked Tom, starting to his feet. He was answered almost at once by more yells. "Oh, master, come quickly!" cried the giant. There are many men here. There are stowaways aboard. End of chapter 20. Recording by Scott Sherris, Atlanta, Georgia, USA.